After a relationship ends, you might notice yourself asking why and not being able to come up with an answer of why did this relationship end. On this video, we talk about the why. I'm Alan Robarge, an attachment-focused psychotherapist and a relationship educator, and I like to talk about how to heal attachment trauma and improve our relationships. And on this video, we're going to talk about when relationships end, we often find ourselves fixating on why. We want answers. So this video is about the why of why relationships end. Now, real quick before I jump in, I do want to say if you value and benefit from this content, please consider becoming a sustaining supporter. You can do this by making a donation. You can join us in the membership community, improve your relationships, or you could also purchase one of my courses. Also, don't forget to do what I call all the things, and you know what I'm talking about with videos. You have heard it 800 times from other YouTube creators. That's please click the like button, subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, hit the notification bell. Every time that you do, you are really supporting the channel and helping me grow. And it's also a way for us to stay in touch. It's important that like-minded people are able to connect with each other. Let's jump into the video and the ideas. I have a bunch of notes here I'm going to grab, and I usually over-prepare for these videos, so I might look down at my notes and jump around a little bit. But I want to begin, if we're talking about relationships ending, and if this title grabs you, the why did it end? Why? We often find ourselves coming back to the why. And when we are looping in grief, and for some of us who have a history of attachment injuries that has registered as attachment trauma in our nervous system, this looping is also mean a constant provoking and activation of our nervous system. And one of our trauma symptoms is intrusion. We cannot we cannot think linearly or think clearly. What happens is that we are bombarded with memories and ideas and feelings, and it really hijacks our mind. And this could be cognitive information, memories, images, conversations. You find yourself talking to yourself, imagining, well, I should have said this and I should have said that. And you might even have an imaginary conversation with the person, the partner, the family member, whoever it is, this relationship has ended, and you find yourself maybe even speaking out loud and engaging them. And what comes back is, why did it end? Why can't we resolve it? Why does it have to be like this? And there's never a clear answer. And so this video is about working with the why, and also offering empathy, knowing that this is very painful. We are trying so hard to make sense of something that doesn't make sense, especially if we're talking about attachment trauma, especially if we're talking about family dynamics and family history and family rejection and relationships that don't resolve, or if it's a partner relationship where you have tried everything. And because of the amount of effort and energy and sincerity that you have put into wanting the relationship to work out, you repeatedly come back to this why. Why? I need answers. I need to intellectually make sense of this. I need to put all of the pieces together so that the equation comes out to equal sanity. Because I just don't understand. I can't fully make sense of why. Why did it end? Why can't we repair? Why don't I have closure? Why do I still think about this? Why is this grieving? Why is my life on hold? So empathy. Let's start with just acknowledging how painful this is. And you're not alone. The reason why I'm making this video is this is very, very common. Many, as you know for yourself, if you've entered therapy and you started to talk about, well, why are you here in therapy? What's going on? And inevitably we start telling our story. We tell the story of the relationship. We tell the story of the arguments. We tell the story of the places of tension, the places where we get hooked and we can't create resolution. And each time that we tell it, we're trying to drop down into more greater understanding, not only understanding the story, the dynamic of the other person said this, you said that, they said this happened, you did that. Not only the details in the chronology, but how a relationship itself ends. To really accept relationships end. And the why in our brain will say, well, why me? Why my relationship? I thought that we're different. This relationship's different. The degree of effort and going into it eyes wide open. Now, maybe you're watching this and you went into it eyes a bit shut, a bit clueless of what you were doing. You attempted to create a relationship. And then what happens is we bump into our suffering. We bump into our attachment injuries, our attachment trauma. And it seems to have a life of its own. And it takes over. And we play out old patterns. We play out behaviors. And we respond from an insecure place of wanting the other person to help us manage the intensity of our hurt and pain that's coming from our past. Could be past relationships, could be very much recent past relationships, could also be childhood, could be from your family, could be from a lifetime of disconnect, of not belonging, of not being valued fully for who you are, not being able to speak, to say your truth in a way that it lands, that it's received, and that you know that there's a mirroring where the other person knows you deeply. And a lot of the pain, a lot of the reason why the relationships doesn't work out for many of us with attachment trauma is that we really want this kind of experience of dropping down into a shared knowing of each other. In relationships, you might have heard this before. There's this idea of you, there's this idea of me, and then when we're in a relationship together, there's the we. We create an us. We create a we and an us, and this has a life of its own. You can't control it. You cannot only command and demand that the relationship look a certain way, that the person behave, the other person must behave according to your rules and meet your needs and your desires. And so we are challenged. We're grappling, or we're straddling between this I part of ourselves, our self, our independence, our autonomy, our agency of saying, this is who I am, this is what I want, this is how I'm showing up in relationship. And the other person's doing the same. And then there's this overlap, and it's within the space of the overlap that we find this is where the relationship itself lives. Now, some therapists talk about, and again, you might have heard this before, that the relationship is like a third entity. It's this other thing. It's not just contained here in my experience. It's not just contained within the experience of the other person. Again, when I say person, this could be a partner, it could also be family member, could be friend, could be really important work relationship, whatever it is, that we bring our desires into all these relationships, and they inevitably are out of our control. We attempt to assert influence, to steer it in the direction that we would want, to ask for what we want, to ask that our needs show up in the relationship, and also in a reciprocal way let in the other person's influence so that we accommodate, we compromise, we listen. It's a shared experience that we're creating with each other, and we cannot force it. So that's what I mean when I say a relationship ends, and we come back to saying, why? Why did it end? And I'm sorry for this answer. It's going to sound so incredibly simplistic. It's going to sound maybe even flip, like it's a throwaway, like a joke. I don't mean it. I mean it sincerely. This idea, relationships end because they do. Now hear that, why does a relationship end? Well, this is what happens. Relationships end. Oh, no. You might find yourself saying, no, not me, not my relationship. We had vows. We had commitment. We shared values. We negotiated, I love you. We negotiated, hey, let's not abandon or reject each other just so that we could protect ourselves from what has happened in the past. And we thought we had created this contract. And one of the most challenging things for many of us is that we adopt this. I believe it's very cultural. A lot of it has to do with where you live, the culture, believing in this romantic storyline, a romantic narrative that says, till death do us part, and that you're going to make this incredible lifelong commitment, and you'll be my forever person. It is, in one framework, one way to look at that, to say, well, isn't that romantically beautiful? And we can still believe it, but we can't believe it at the expense of denying reality that relationships end. And that includes yours. Now, I have also been exploring relationships, talking to people, making videos for a number of years of this topic. And I know that some people get really upset in this moment when I say, well, due to the reality, the laws of impermanence, everything's impermanent. It's the idea that the coffee cup is already broken. We can enjoy the coffee cup today, but we know one day it's going to get a chip in it. One day it's going to break. And that's what happens. It's the cycle of life. And I know that a number of people get very angry when they hear me say this, because the counter argument is, well, this is about the inability to actually make a commitment, and that there's so many people quick to end when the going gets tough, and they're not able to weather the storm. And it's really then about a kind of laziness or a lack of integrity. And it's still upholding that judgment of it usually gets presented not only to one individual partner or to family members. It's this commentary on culture and society to say that, everyone's head is not screwed on straight, and that we just give up. We believe relationships are disposable, and we just move on. And I'm so angry, and I don't believe. And if people would only commit, they would be able to save and salvage their relationships. Now, unfortunately, this presentation, usually what happens is that the person sharing this is coming from a place of righteousness, and righteousness is a very sophisticated form of anger, which is a very sophisticated way of managing the profound disappointment, the grief of a relationship ending and it just not working out. And we're still trying to make an argument, and in the stages of grieving, what we would call bargaining, we're still trying to bargain with reality. Well, it ended. It didn't work out because the other person can't create a commitment, and they're just so quick to throw it away. Now, included in that thinking is still upholding the idea that, well, if we just choose to be together, we can force making it work. And this also shows up with people as a last-ditch effort to save their relationship. Let's go to therapy. The therapist will, we've not really been consistently in therapy throughout this whole process. We have continually argued, and trust has eroded, and we have felt so disconnected. And now that we are at this crisis upon a crisis, now let's force therapy again in order to hopefully force the repair to stay together. And this video, there are many videos I have made that I can continue to make about how we do practice repair in a relationship. And this video is not about that. This video is about it is over, it has ended, and you find yourself coming back to why. Why? I'm just not going to accept it. Why does it do this? I once heard a lecture from a Buddhist teacher, Dzongzar Khyentse Rinpoche, which is a bit challenging to say. And he's actually very funny. I don't think he's trying to be funny, but in the simplicity of his speaking, and he has an accent, and he's so intentional with his language. And his lectures were on love and relationship, and I, again, as I think I just mentioned, I really valued them and found almost joy listening. Is rather intelligent. And there's this moment where he says to the audience that he's lecturing, he says, do you want to know, and I can't imitate his accent, but he says, do you want to know the biggest symbol of insecurity? And the way he says it with his accent, he does say, insecurity. He said, do you want to know the biggest symbol of insecurity? And then there's this pause, and the audience is like, he's waiting on his every word, and there's this pause, and then he points to his finger and he goes, wedding ring. I hope you get the humor in this, because I know some people will get angry when I share this. Yes, a wedding ring is a symbol. It can be beautiful. It can represent the shared commitment and the agreement. It's a contract. The wedding ring represents the contract. And also, by the way, we are sometimes, maybe not all the time, but sometimes we're using that contract to cheat impermanence and to remind ourselves, no, this relationship is permanent until at least one of us dies, and maybe we'll die together in a bus, so that if we both believe in the same afterlife experience, we'll be able to, enter that afterlife together, so we're technically still together. I mean, there's this need, and if you think about attachment systems, attachment even the biology of attachment, the physiology of attachment, the way that our brain is wired is that we want connection. And life is really, really scary. Life is groundless. Life is chaotic. Life throws you curveballs. Life can feel isolating and lonely. Life can feel like you're rejected. Life makes you feel friendless. So isn't it so wonderful that we have relationships, and specifically partner-type relationships? We want a partner. We want this forever. We want this permanence to buffer us from all of those horrible things, that incredible groundlessness and feeling adrift and floating in the void, floating in outer space, disconnected. But our relationship tethers us, and it can provide great comfort. It can provide warmth. It does help us find ground in the groundlessness of who we are, but not all the time, and also not an absolute, because many of you know you can still be in a happy, healthy, lovely, wonderful relationship, or have brief moments of that, and you're still grappling with your own loneliness. You still realize that you have stress and disappointments and maybe health issues, maybe other family members are really suffering, and then that creates suffering for you. So this forever relationship, this commitment of a forever, is oftentimes designed to help buffer us from life's challenges and deep, deep hurts. And when it ends, we no longer have that tether. We no longer have the placeholder of the construct of the commitment as the forever to shield us from being out on the front lines of life, the existential struggle, the pain of living. Think of a tree, back to this wedding ring idea that goes against, its attempt is to acknowledge permanence of the relationship forever, but it also, in the story that I told of the Buddhist teacher speaking, the Rinpoche, when he says wedding ring is really a big sign. We're announcing to the world, say, I'm so insecure. I need to carry this ring as a touchstone, as a reminder, because I cannot manage the thought of this relationship ending. And yet you look outside And at the time that I'm making this video, it happens to be entering winter. And not too long ago, I have a lovely little dog, and I stay up late a lot, which I don't know why, but anyway, I go out, at 2 in the morning, 2:30 in the morning, to take the dog out, and I'm standing outside. Of course, it's quiet. There's often moonlight. And not too long ago, I was standing there, and the whole tree was yellow and orange. It was autumn, beautiful, beautiful colors. And the leaves were falling at a very consistent rate. They were falling quickly. It was like raining. It was raining leaves. And in 24 hours, because I went out the next day, and pretty much all the leaves had fallen out. The tree was completely full, almost, not completely, but the majority of the leaves were on the tree. And then they all fell on the ground. And within 24 hours, I go out the next day, standing in the same place, taking the dog out. And I'm just noticing now there's this carpet on the lawn of yellow and orange. It was very beautiful. It was the first time that I think I ever really participated in leaves falling. Like, of course I know leaves fall. Of course oh yeah, they're falling over there. But in that moment, in the middle of the night, standing there, I was really paying attention to, oh wow, this is the leaves, the tree's process of losing the leaves. And I just felt connected to nature. I felt closer to like I'm in the middle of it happening. And what is it? It's the cycle of the seasons. What is it? It's the entering winter, coming into spring. It is the death and the rebirth. It's the things end. August ends. September ends. October ends. And here are the leaves on the ground. It reminded me of sharing this idea of why relationships end. And if we think about the wedding ring and our forever relationship and telling us the story that, no, this relationship is going to last forever. Just look outside your window. Look at the leaves on the ground. Everything changes, including relationships. And your relationship, let me play with the metaphor here. Your relationship can lose all of its leaves, and you might not make it to the spring for new growth. Sometimes all the leaves fall off of our relationship tree, and we have to realize, you know what? We're entering winter and it's over. It's time to end. That's what this is telling me. We have to be willing to look at the signs and ask ourselves, or be honest with ourselves and say, am I able to let this in? Am I able to let in the ending? I want to take a break here real quick. I'm going to play with and throw a look at my notes and just pick up a couple ideas. It's kind of like station identification. I talked about how relationships have a life of their own. We demand and command it to be different, but we cannot control. We're solidifying around a story. And grieving is groundless, so we're trying to buffer the groundlessness by hanging on to this rigid view of the outcome that we're demanding. We talked about you, me, and we, and how in this relationship we can't control and direct where it's going to go. The we aspect creates a life of its own. Now think about when you lose the we in your mind. We were a we. We did things together. I had a we in my life. Some of the challenge of why we keep coming back to why did it end is that it is too painful. It's too painful to give up the we. And think of this as internal identity. You have internalized the relationship into who you are, and you're getting comfort, and you can orient to the world. And the world is somewhat safer. The world is somewhat more doable to be in this world because I'm carrying the we inside of me. Now, if some of us have attachment injuries and attachment trauma that's unhealed. For most of us, I can't say, it's absolutely true, but in general, we say that when we experience unreliable attachment connections in usually our family, it could come outside of family, but if there was an inconsistency of emotional attunement and limbic resonance and being seen, known, and heard, this has impacted our development of self. We doubt ourselves. We think we're not good enough. We've never quite been able to rely on the other person, the parent usually, the family member, the primary caregiver. And again, this could also be reinforced in our partner relationships, but I'm specifically referencing our developmental years. And that if we were not able to trust enough the consistency of our attachment figure / our parent to provide that consistency so that we're not hijacked by fear, the fear of being left behind. If a parent doesn't know a child, the child feels left out. If a parent doesn't mirror back the child's inner world experience, the message to the child is that your inner world has no bearing or value or pertinence on our relating. I don't need to know anything about your inner world. So the child learns, we learn, well, my inner world must not be that important. Or my inner world is so ugly and disgusting and not worthy of being known. Therefore, I'm going to do everything I can. Usually this is subconscious. Children are not, getting a book and writing this in a journal, but we somehow figure out to say, well, if my parent doesn't want to know my inner world, I guess I don't want to know my own inner world. And I better not know my own inner world because I bet there's something ugly and shameful and disgusting and unworthy of love. So that whole inner dialogue or construct, the developmental dynamic playing out there is linked to our sense of self, how we know who we are. To know your inner world means to know your preferences, to know your likes and dislikes, to link it to agency and voice so that you can assert those preferences, those likes and dislikes. And in doing so, you're revealing aspects of who you are. You're beginning to really define yourself. And if the parent was not able to mirror and join you in that place, either your sense of self is underdeveloped or you have a really strong layer, a harsh layer of judgment that you are directing towards your own self. Now, why did I just share all of this? We're talking about relationships ending. And when a relationship ends, and we are a we, you, me, we, and we internalize the sense of we, and it gives us, it lifts us up. We have a lilt in our step. It's just easier to see the horizon and to pick a path and to feel like, I got this. Life has a little more pizzazz or zest or meaning or purpose because I'm in a we. But let's say when that we is challenged because the relationship is over and our internal scaffolding of the we falls apart and we're very frightened because it's sad to lose the we. It's so we loved the we. And now that goes away, we're met with ourself. And if you have a history of attachment injuries and attachment trauma, you're going to bump into that underdeveloped sense of self. You're going to bump into those core messages that say, you're not lovable. Of course it ended. relationships end because of you. You're the problem. And no matter how hard you tried to be sincere and to read a book and to go to therapy and to watch videos about relationships, it has ended because you're not worth being in a relationship. And this mirrors this internal voice, this criticism, this trauma voice is linked to and or even just directly the same voice of our childhood. And again, this doesn't mean that you are conscious of this. It doesn't mean that what I'm saying is that you literally have that, narrative or a song playing in your head. But when you look at what is the consequence of not being seen, known, heard, valued, understood, appreciated, and receiving messages that your inner world is not worth knowing, and then you enter your adult years, you attempt to be in a relationship, you have a couple relationships that a little bit work out, a little bit don't work out, and it's practice, and then you get into this one really important relationship that you think is so just a depth of love, and this is going to work out, and guess what? It didn't work out, and that's the reality. That's the leaves falling off of the tree. And when this happens, we crumble, and this insecurity, remember what he said, the insecurity gets activated. And it's linked to, we don't have a strong sense of self. We use the we part, the we of the relationship, to bolster our sense of self and to bolster having meaning in this world. And if the relationship goes away, if the we goes away, then we feel that we don't have meaning, and we also feel that we don't have direction. And we are confronted, it activates that very younger part of ourselves, the wounded, hurtful part of ourselves that says, I can't just exist here as a self. I can't, if I'm only here as a self, I know what that is like. It equals isolation. And that's the experience I had in my family. So this is one reason why, although I'm slightly going off on a tangent here, but grief is so excruciatingly painful and crushing for those of us with attachment injuries for this reason, and that we're experiencing not only the grief of the relationship ending, but we're experiencing the grief, the historical grief, the unresolved grief of this trauma that has reinforced not knowing ourselves. And we do not want to look at this. It's too painful. We are also hardwired in a way through our history to have a strong aversion to feeling everything I'm talking about. And because we can't say, hey, I'm going to drop down into the crushing grief of what it's like to be invisible and unknown in my family and to not be seen by the parent, I cannot manage that. My brain even, it's so floating in the subconscious, I can't even fully pull up that dynamic. I'm not going to touch that. It's too much. But you know what? I am going to keep looping in why. Well, why did this one? Why? Look, if I can just figure out how to get back together, figure out why it ended, what if we could just why just something. Our brain goes haywire as a distraction from dropping down into the grief that we've spent a whole lifetime defending ourselves against. And this is why endings are so incredibly painful for everyone, and for those of us with attachment injuries, it's kind of like a double dose of being crushed, a double dose of grief. I often use the word or use the phrase, it's like reversing your blood flow. So like your blood is flowing in one direction, which means this direction is congruent and in sync with your partner, with the relationship that's so important to you. And this is the third time I'm saying it, but just, it could be a friend. It could be a very important friend. It doesn't have to be a partner. It doesn't have to be a parent. But, these are the most important relationships to us. And when we are in relationship and feels like our blood is flowing together in sync in the same way, that to end a relationship and then have to tell yourself, I cannot resolve the conflict, the disconnect. I'm not going to be able to make sense of why it ended. I don't really have a clear why, but I'm going to accept reality and move forward into the grief and say, it's over, it's over, it's over, but why? It's over, but why? It's over. And I describe that process can feel like you're trying to reverse your blood. If I just told you right now, like, reverse your blood flow, why don't you make your blood go the other direction? It just feels so fundamentally going against the core of who you are, of the depth of how you committed to this relationship. And I think what I'm talking about that you might relate to is this phrase people say, well, I was all in. I was really all in. I believed it. I allowed myself to believe it in order to be all in, and I just completely trusted. I trusted life in general. I trusted myself. I trusted the person. Sure, I was scared. Sure, I was cautious. Sure, I saw red flags, but I just really fully went all in. And when the relationship ends, we don't understand, how can you go all in and then realize that's still not going to make a relationship work, quote unquote, forever. We're still, it still comes back to this core belief that there's no turning back, that once you're all in, once you believe in the story of forever, once you make the commitment, that you trust in the permanence. And in order to do so, we also pull the wool over our eyes about the impermanence, that impermanence is there. A more mature, a more challenging way to be in relationship is to aspire to living as if there's permanence, and to commit fully to a shared values, and to negotiate the contract and say, I would like this to be really long term, and if it's a forever, I'm open to that. And we also simultaneously, with a kind of humility, accept that also anything's possible, everything's impermanent, relationships end, including this one. Let me check real quick my notes as I did last time. This point somewhat links to what has been shared. It's just saying it in a different way. If there's a you, a me, and a we, and this we it has a life of its own, because we're not in charge, it's not just us. And we have family history conditioning, my family history conditioning, your family history conditioning. We have family history assumptions. You know, my family, when I'm in my family, I just assume certain things about relating, love, connection, communicating, openness, trust are a certain way because we grow up with these assumptions. And then the person I'm in relationship with, similar to you, you have your own family assumptions, your partner has family assumptions, and this creates this hybrid, a co-joined assumptions that once they join together, what's that phrase? The whole is greater than the sum of its part. That they come together and they create this third entity of now this collective history of assumptions that we can't fully control or dictate how they're going to go. And all of these factors influence, well, the relationship didn't work out because of shared family rules, this history of rules, this history of trauma. That's a major one. Family history of unmet attachment needs. I bring my unmet attachment needs to the relationship. The person that I'm in relationship with brings their attachment needs, the unmet ones. And collectively, it creates a shared wounding. Now, this is what is meant also by a trauma bond, is that if we only, mostly, are interacting, knowing each other through our own attachment wounds, we're bonding through the trauma, we're bonding through the wound, we are pitting the wound against each other, we are projecting onto the other person, you better love me so good, so right, and in just the perfect way to give me what I never got. And so I'm very much putting the attachment wound between us, and the other partner could be doing the same thing, putting the attachment wound between us. And so we're not in the present moment. We're not bound by the limitations and the ordinariness of lackluster relationship. Like, relationship doesn't have to be amazing, beautiful fireworks all the time. It could just be ordinary. But when we put our wound between each other, it's the conduit, it's the language that we're using to connect. That's what is meant by trauma bond. And then just to clarify, trauma bond also could very specifically have to do with abuse dynamics and relating through abuse. So my definition, my application is a bit broader than when it's talked about in the context of abuse, and I wanted to make that distinction. Because we're not in charge, we now in relationship have shared values, a shared frequency of emotional attunement. Like, think about that. Why did a relationship end? Well, we have different frequency, different needs for how frequently we want to attune and connect. And there's also some partners, some people say, I don't want to attune and connect. Oh, I hear the definition. I went to therapy. I know what it means. I've read the book. You forced having me read the book. You know, I'm just not interested. That's not who I am. I just don't want to talk about these things. I don't really care about how you feel about your process. And I don't really care about your emotional needs and how we can unpack and explore the meta layers of missed connection. You know, I just want to get a pizza and watch TV, and that's who I am. So you need a different kind of person. That person is not gonna, if you value naming and tracking and monitoring and upholding and nurturing, and it's like planting seeds, it's gardening, you gotta tend to the garden. And if you're the type of person who your frequency of emotional connection includes consciously directing some mindful behavior to say, hey honey, I'm here for you, I'm connecting with you, let's talk about our feelings, let's just sit with each other and feel our togetherness. Let's talk about how life is challenging. Let's include emotional language. And when we do that, our limbic systems are gonna sync up, we're gonna feel this sense of connection. And that's what we often mean when we say, you know, I felt like we were one, we became one. It's those moments of limbic resonance. You just feel this sense of exhaling and a deep knowing that you're known. That's emotional attunement. That's limbic resonance. And some people, one can't do this, and some people also really clearly don't want it. They don't, that's not a value to them. Now, we don't judge them. We don't label them as a certain attachment style. And this is what has come up with a lot of the teachings in attachment styles, that it turns rigid and it also becomes weaponized to judge the partner and to say, oh, well, usually who gets the bad rap is the fearful, dismissive, the fearful avoidant, the dismissive avoidant. Anybody who does not have your desired depth of connection and how you want it to have a certain level of connection, and anything less than that means that they're inadequate and there's something wrong with them, and you read in a book they must be avoidantly attached and they have to change. And this often comes up in our why, searching for why. Like, why didn't they change? Why weren't they willing? Here's one that I like. I find it a little silly sometimes, but I've done the work. I've done the work. I'm putting in the work. I'm doing my work. I've did my work. I've graduated from the work. I'm so evolved. I have a PhD in healing work, and it's the other person doesn't. They're inadequate. They're failing to do the work. We create these constructs to bolster our own insecurities at the expense of the partner, and trying to create a new narrative of, well, why didn't it work? Why did the relationship end? Well, they didn't do the work. They're not willing to do the work like me. There's still this ego bolstering component in that, and it's still based upon making sure that we put the onus, the blame, and the judgment on the other person's inadequacies. And this kind of conversation can get really, really challenging because, well, maybe, at face value, maybe the other partner is not at the same level. Maybe the other person really doesn't have the education or the evolution of maturing that you do, or that we would hope that they would arrive at in order to create mature adult relationships. And even if that's true, we have to be very mindful to discern how we use it to bolster our own hurt self, to try to comfort ourselves into the ending. Well, it ended. Well, of course it ended, because they're not doing the work. They're less than, they're inadequate, they're clueless. And then we can even move into, there's the whole range of rather pejorative, nasty terms that people say. You'll notice, and perhaps this has happened to you, where you have a friend, or even you've seen it in family. Like sometimes divorced parents do this around their children, but needing to make the other person out to be a demon, make them out that they'll create choice words. That person is a real, fill in the blank, whatever you want, and using that person, that becomes their nickname, and from here on out, for potentially till the rest of your life, every time you think of that person, every time you talk about the person, they now have a very, a label, a pejorative label of that's a judgment. And maybe they deserve it, that's possible too. At the same time, if we're trying to break down and not feed the confusion of why, sometimes we have to take a break and say, well, it's not about calling the other person out as being completely inadequate and blaming them and it's their fault. It is a bit more universal and transcends their individual behavior and transcends our incredibly advanced, evolved consciousness that we brought to the relationship. And yes, I meant that to be sarcastic. Remember, humility, trying to be humble about the whole thing. The moment that I think I got it figured out, I don't got it figured out. So the relationship needs to end. And that does not compute. And so we just come back to why. This is going to be, I think, the last time. Check my notes again. Take a break, get a glass, get something to drink. One reason why relationships end, when we're talking about attachment trauma, we are buffered and safeguarded from our grief and the consciousness of our family history, so that it creates a blind spot. So most of us, I don't know what the statistic is, you can perhaps challenge this, but in general, most of us are just clueless. We don't know how our attachment trauma is going to get in the way, and that we're no longer practicing a present moment relationship in real time as adults with this other person, and we're trying to learn and grow. Something happens where the attachment trauma takes over and plays out through repetition compulsion, plays out through trauma reenactment, the old patterns. It ends with a crash and burn. It's very, very painful. And part of the why is coming into the conscious. Well, it ended because you have unresolved attachment trauma. And there's no way that you would have known this until it gets activated in the relationship. And the way it's going to get activated is based upon the depth or the degree of intimacy and vulnerability. That trauma is stored at the level of activation. And what this means in relationship terms, it's only when you love as deeply, as committed, as connected, with a sense of abandon and trust, not abandonment, but a sense of abandon and trust and openness, it's going to mirror the same depth of intimacy and vulnerability that a child inherits or a child brings to the relationship with the parent. Again, asterisk, everything's not about childhood. Everything's not about the relationship with the parent. So keep in mind, you could take these same dynamics and apply them to other relationships. But for the most part, many of us, it's coming from what we learned developmentally. And I lost my train of thought here, this idea, oh man, I just totally lost it. What are we talking about? Oh, right. We don't wake up to our own suffering until it gets activated. And asking ourselves why is also a way to make a declaration like, I didn't see that. Every time we say why, it's like, I didn't see this coming. Well, why did it end? I didn't see it coming. Well, it can't end if I didn't see it coming. How would I know? I didn't know. And so many of us wake up to our own suffering and the need for learning about relationships and the need to drop down into our own internal process to ask ourselves, what do we need in order to grow and to make sense of the suffering that's coming out of this history of attachment trauma. And there's no way we would have known that until it gets activated and triggered by the ending of the relationship. And now this is how some people say, well, that's actually how the relationship is a gift. That's how grieving is a gift. That's the message of the gift. I sometimes challenge that because I don't really know. There's just something a bit insensitive about saying depth, one's experience of suffering is a gift. I think that's a bit of I think it's disingenuous because it still hurts and it's still suffering. And we can take from it life lessons. We can assign meaning to it. That suffering can wake us up and we grow. But to go as far as to say it's a gift, I find that belittling, actually, or a cliche. It's a kind of like throwaway. Oh, well, it's such a gift. The joke is, for me, the joke is like, well, it's a gift that, cancer was a gift. I don't think in this video I'm going to lift my middle finger to the camera. How I feel about it. But why did the relationship end? Because we have unresolved attachment trauma and it took over, it got in the way, and now that it's ended, we are confronted with what do we want to do with the knowledge of that history of trauma? And are we willing to shift focus away from creating repair and being with that one person and pull our attention and focus to the relationship, to our history and to ourselves? And say it's no longer about trying to figure out the why of the other person and what they said and what we said and this, that, or the other. This is really about what kind of relationship do I want to have with myself and my relationship skills and this attachment trauma that is still coded into my brain and coded into how I interact, and even is so coded into my brain, it can select the partner that I choose. It selects other people who are going to behave in a congruent way to allow the trauma reenactment to unfold. All of this, the ending, it's looping in the why and continually asking ourselves why, is a way to buy ourselves time from dropping down into these other layers. And we think if we can only have it make sense in a very linear sense and resolve it and keep it simple, it might allow us to tiptoe around what's being stirred up. And oftentimes that why, that incessant why, is the trauma symptom of intrusion, of it just constantly bombarding you and saying, knocking at the door, hello, look at me, hello, I'm here, hello, look at me, I'm not going anywhere. I think we're getting ready to come to a close. Another point to make about the why is that we're asking ourselves, or the message there is like, when I say why, and it sounds intellectual, like part of the challenge is that why throws us into linear, chronological thinking, cognitive mind. We're looking for evidence, we're looking for details, we want to name. When we get stuck in why, we tell a lot of stories. And this happened, then that happened, then this happened, and they said that, and then I said this, and then the friend did that, and then we went there, and then this happened. And if perhaps you've done this or you've noticed with some others, it takes on a kind of overdrive of talking. It's a kind of nervous talking and trying to find details in the why. And what that does is it obscures one of the drivers, or the message in the why, or what's driving that is the need to really say, this relationship has ended, I can't make sense of it, and I need reassurance, and I'm going to stay overly focused on resolving the why, because if I can resolve the why, then maybe I will feel some comfort and get reassurance of I'm going to be okay, it's okay that this has ended, and until I get that reassurance and can allow my nervous system to calm down, I'm going to stay overly focused on the cognitive details and intellectualizing the story and rehashing conversation after conversation and I'm coming at it from why. And if I take a break and take a breath and say, hey, let's not figure it out. Let's not figure out why. Let's not do the math equation. What's the request underneath? The request underneath is, I need reassurance, and I'm not going to get it from the partner that I am ending a relationship with. And I also don't want it from anybody else. So I'm in this dilemma that I want reassurance. I'm struggling to give it to myself. And there it is. This is really hard stuff. You know, when I started this video, I started with empathy. Say, you know, if you're in this place, it's painful, and it can feel torturous. It can really derail our daily plans, our life. Getting out of bed, going to work is so very, very hard to function at your job and to be able to take care of yourself. You know, go to dinner, do your laundry, just, you know, take care of life when your brain is hijacked with this crushing grief that is constantly asking you to solve this very, very hard math equation that is the math equation of why. And so as we started in this video, empathy to you, knowing that this is so painful, I think at this point, been chatting for a while here, exploring these different ideas, that this is where the relationship ends. I do want to thank you so much for watching this video. There's going to be more videos similar to this, other conversations about attachment trauma. And before we close, to think about, why do we explore these topics? Why do we invest in a healing process? Why do we invest in learning about relationships? For me, the answer is because emotional connections matter. And to really say that as a declaration, emotional connections are important, and we need to learn how to preserve them and create them, or perhaps in that, reverse the order. We need to know how to create them and then preserve them. And for many of us, we have a history of coming from some other chapters of our life where emotional connections were discredited or discarded or not valued. And so that's why I want to say emotional connections matter, and that's what we're doing on these videos. Thank you so much for listening. Leave a comment. Again, subscribe, hit the like button. All those things helps promote this channel and lets me know that this content is resonating with you. Thank you for listening. More videos on the way soon. See you next time.